Welcome to Living Grounded, Village's weekly Q&A, where you can ask anonymous questions about God, the Bible, life with Jesus, and all things in between. Okay. Hello and welcome to Living Grounded. This is episode 4. If you weren't with us on Sunday, we looked at the birth of Jesus and sort of unpacked if Jesus is God, come to earth, how will we respond? Will we be like Herod, who was threatened by him, or will we be like the Magi who bowed down and worshipped him? So you can check that out on the app if you missed it. But today we're going to be talking about, sharing the gospel, discipling people from different cultures, and then also going to be unpacking a bit about modesty. There was another question that got submitted that we won't be able to get to today. Tim, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, look, we got a question about should a Christian attend a gay marriage ceremony, and really important question for our time. Look, I want to deal with that well. I want to give that the time it kind of deserves in the culture that we live in. So we'll push that on to the next week or the week after. We have got a bunch of other questions that we also, we need to do. So, apologies if that was your question, but we will get to it, okay?
Yeah. Question 1 is, how do we share the gospel and disciple people whose culture is entwined with religious and spiritual beliefs? I think this is coming out of, you mentioned Hinduism in the sermon on Sunday.
Really helpful question, and going to become an even more important question, I think, as the years roll along, the way that Western culture is kind of moving. We are going back to something, I think, closer to the earlier biblical times of particularly the book of Acts, and so that's as much as Christians are struggling with that, there's also a helpfulness in terms of we have got a model for what that can look like, turning from what we would have called or might call paganism. And it sounds like a pretty loaded term, but it's not meant to be used. I'm not saying that mean-spiritedly, that's just the name for it. That's kind of what we'll be engaging with, and particularly with a multicultural society. But the example that was given was, one of the examples given was, how do we engage with Indigenous culture, and particularly something like a smoking ceremony, and, just to speak to the relevance of that. It was only recently that my kid's school sent the letter home saying, hey, we're going to be doing a smoking ceremony at school. And it wasn't a permission slip, as in, do you want your children to participate? It was just that's what's happening, And so this was an interesting kind of opportunity to wrestle with that. But let's start. We always want to start with a framework of thinking, not just speaking to every particular individual example or instance, but how do we think about this? And important for actually both of our questions today is just continuing to remember the overarching framework is always love God and love people. But when we say that, we're not using the language of love, the word love, in perhaps the same way that our culture sometimes uses it. We don't mean, so culturally speaking today, love can often mean just affirming people. To love people, you must just affirm everything they do. But no, I don't think anyone actually believes that, even though they kind of want that for themselves. Culturally speaking, I don't think anyone would go, we should affirm, say, the I don't know how ancient cultural practice it is, but the Chinese cultural practice of, say, foot wrapping. I don't think anyone wants to affirm that. I don't think anyone's on board with affirming, say, child bride cultures. So no one actually believes in affirming everything. The question is, what shouldn't we affirm? And what is it loving to just accept? Now, I've actually, and it's just worth seeing why God and loving God and having the Bible is so helpful here, because to make those decisions over what should we affirm and what shouldn't we affirm, you actually need a moral standard. You need a moral framework to be able to do that in. What is to say that foot wrapping is bad? Well, I can confidently say that because I don't think it is. I think I've got a standard of moral framework that allows me to say that. So that's a good thing. And our love has an ultimate shape to us, which is, of course, Jesus, the self-sacrificial love of Jesus for the sake of others, within the here is what God says is good. So I guess the passage that people would often go to in this question is 1 Corinthians 9. Paul says to the Jew, I became a Jew, to the Greek a Greek, for the sake of saving, I'm paraphrasing here, but for the sake of saving many. I become like others. But I think it's also worth seeing in the same 1 Corinthians that Paul also talks about that there's many things that he wouldn't do for the sake of other cultures. Like there's things he won't do. So here's some of my thinking in it in a way to kind of break this down again, framework. I reckon every culture has elements to it that are beautiful, benign, and malignant. Okay, if you want another B, you can just say bad. So beautiful, benign, bad, or malignant. So let's start with the beautiful, and maybe because it's been brought up, so we enjoy, we celebrate the beautiful parts of cultures that resonate with the God who is, and so on. We just ignore or kind of shrug off the benign. It just, every culture has stuff that's kind of neutral. And we don't participate, and we actually speak the truth to aspects that are malignant or bad. So again, very hard to discern which is which, but let's have a crack at this with the Indigenous culture. So we want to celebrate, I think we want to celebrate aspects of Indigenous culture, particularly, for instance, the way that they've engaged with the land as custodians of the land, in a sense. So not their worship of land, which, there is some stuff there, but particularly their use of resources, the wisdom in how to use the world wisely without destroying it. I think that's a better part of Indigenous culture than sometimes aspects of Western culture. We want to celebrate that. We want to go, that's great. I think we want to shrug off elements that are benign. So I reckon the acknowledgement to country kind of fits into this a little bit. Now, some will find this tricky. Some will go, but there's elements of paganism to it. And I go, I don't think there always is. I think it depends who's doing it. I think it depends what's being said. But I think that Christians can happily participate in acknowledgement to country. I think there's some wonderful, thoughtful Christian examples of acknowledgement to country that both acknowledge that God is the ultimately sovereign one over the land, but that we respect and accept First Nations people and their connection to the land and so on, their displacement, that they've had a tough time, historically speaking. I think we can love Indigenous people by acknowledging that, respecting that, and just giving words to that and participating in it. There might be some acknowledgements to country that I would feel much less comfortable in participating in, but I'm speaking generally speaking. I think that's kind of a benign thing that we can go, yeah, no worries. Look, that's respect and loving. Now, it gets a bit trickier when we come to the malignant stuff. And, I want to be very careful here. I want to be wise. I'm not an expert on Indigenous culture. And I think it's also really tricky speaking with Indigenous because it's hard to discern what is truly Indigenous culture and what is now modern Indigenous culture that's been affected by colonialism and displacement and so on. So, very hard. But here's probably one that I would go fits kind of in this category, and that is kind of the Dreamtime story stuff. So, for instance, I wouldn't be reading my kids at an early age Dreamtime story stuff. If I did, it would be with a thing of going, hey, this is what Indigenous people believe. Now, why can why can we kind of question that? Why do we have grounds to kind of go, oh, sort of, but not really, and so on? If I have no doubt that my kids are being read Dreamtime stories at a public school, I'd probably want to engage with that with them and go, oh yeah, what do you think about that? You know, have you ever thought about it this way? How do we compare that to the biblical story, and so on? That would be something that I would want to speak the truth to, that isn't just affirming, you know? That would be my example. So, yeah, I think that's... the only bit that I haven't then covered is, what do you do with a smoking ceremony?
Yeah.
Very tricky. To be honest, I actually think that kind of fits somewhere in between. Depends what's being said. Again, depends what's being said. I think it's closer to the acknowledgement to country. I think you've got to be... it's an area where it's an area of wisdom and conscience. I can see some Christians and would back some Christians who go, no, we think it's pretty benign. You know, we explain to our kids, or we know ourselves that there's nothing spiritually going on here. It's not much different than going to a Halloween party. Others, I would also back them if they said, look, we just don't feel comfortable taking part in it because it is a kind of form of acknowledging spirits and banishing spirits that we don't think... the only one who has power over the spirits is Jesus, not a smoking ceremony or an elder or anything like that. We don't think that's helpful. I would back that as well. I think this is one where you could kind of go, could be either or. Again, depends on the situation and context and so on. Go with your conscience, trust in God that you'll be okay whichever one you go.
Yeah, that's helpful. I haven't thought too much about that, so yeah, good to be thinking about. Our next question is, what does the Bible have to say about modesty?
Oh yeah. And I think the context of this question was there seems to be a conversation going on in Queensland. Someone's had a real go at particularly swimwear, women's swimwear, and that's brought that seems to have brought this person a fair bit of condemnation for thinking that he could tell women what to wear and so on. Yeah, heaps tricky. So again, we want to start with the framework of love. We want to love God, the one who's given us our bodies, and we want to love each other. We want to love each other by being helpful to each other, even if that helpful to each other in being able to honour God with our whole lives, even if that comes at a cost to ourselves. Now, this goes both ways. I think we just need to let me start with men. Jesus says, Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:27. Jesus says, if you look on a woman with lust, essentially you're committing adultery in your heart. Very strong words. He'll go on to say that if your eyes cause you to sin, then you should pluck them out. I think what most men can acknowledge is that we are visually stimulated. Generally speaking, the science backs this up, that we are drawn, our eyes are drawn, particularly to the female body. That if we have at all engaged in pornography, this will be kind of multiplied. I would say the neural pathways are pretty wired in. They were already moving in that direction, and then they've been hardwired by things like pornography, but not just pornography, but by social media reels. I mean, this stuff comes up everywhere. Advertising, the sex sells stuff, and when we say sex sells, we generally mean women's bodies sell. This is like so pervasive, right? And so we just need to acknowledge this, men, that this is kind of the air that we breathe, but that it isn't loving to God or to women to use the eyes that God has given us for the sake of seeing women as objects, as sexual objects, for seeing women who aren't our wives as objects of lust, to be devoured by our eyes, essentially for our pleasure. We need to fight this very hard. We need to keep our eyes from sin. Very difficult, but very important in terms of our honouring God and loving women. Now, we could go into many ways. It looks like not accessing porn ever. Fight that with your whole being. Do not be drawn into that world. It will kill you in many ways. But it also looks like being very careful as well over things that you wouldn't call porn, but gee, they're not far from it. To be honest, I've had to cut myself off from ever looking at videos on Facebook because I find that the next one that comes over is almost always something that has some sort of physical woman stuff going on. All of this being said, so we cut out men. We need to fight hard on these TV shows that have sex scenes, nudity in them. My encouragement would be to not watch them. If you're like, look, I think I can watch it without doing this, I fast forward and so on, okay, but just be super careful about that. Make sure you're doing that in accountability with someone. Don't watch it by yourself. If you're going to watch it with, say, your wife or something like that, well, you might be able to do that, but be accountable with her that, hey, we're going to fast forward these things, or, however you're going to deal with it, but don't watch. Be wise, just helpful for those who struggle with the guilt of this and wrestle with it. I think there is a difference between what I would call the first glance and the second glance. So we are, and women, I think, be wise to this as well. It's very hard to stop men from having the first glance at something. So, for instance, you're driving down the street, it is very normal to just see something out of the corner of your eye. I think it's unfair to men to react to that strongly, like, oh, you just looked at that person. Well, I would have looked at that if it was anything, do you know what I mean? It was just that there was movement on the side of the road. The problem is when we go, I really want to see that again. And that's where men, I think we need to continue to fight. It's impossible, I think, to fight against the first glance most of the time. But it is very possible to fight the second glance, and so my encouragement would be keep fighting that for the sake of loving women. All right, so that's speaking to men, okay? Men, let's work hard at this. But women, I think the Bible also speaks to you. The classic section is 1 Timothy 2, verse 9. Paul, after speaking to men about turning to prayer instead of anger, he says, women also want the women to dress modestly with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess worship to God. Now, contextually speaking, there is a little bit of a shift we need to make. Paul, culturally, the issue isn't women not wearing many clothes, because that just wasn't done. The issue there was women wearing expensive clothes, trying to show themselves off by the quality of their dresses, by the quality of their jewelry. And he says, hey, that's not godliness. Godliness is just you dress comfortably and appropriately, culturally speaking, but not with a view to drawing the eye. What are you doing? Trying to draw the eyes of others. Draw the eyes of others to your godliness, not your looks or what you're wearing. And in that, I think we can then come and apply that to today, okay? This is how women can love men, by not causing men to have their eyes drawn to them for their, today, I think, more lack of clothing than expensive jewelry. Back then, men might be more drawn to wealth than we necessarily are today. What we are drawn to, culturally speaking, is sexuality. So, women can love men by not dressing in ways that draw the man's eyes to their sexuality, that emphasize these things, by not making it harder for them than it already is. That's how women can love men. Now, of course, this raises the problem again of wisdom versus law. We would love law on this, I know. Women, I'm sure it would be so much easier for you if it was just like, okay, so we need to wear these sort of clothes. And, you know, I get that. But at the same time, this is where we need to wrestle with it internally. How modest should I be? Maybe here's a question to ask yourself. As you leave the house for the day or so on, as you get dressed, the loving question to ask is what I'm wearing going to be helpful or unhelpful to others? Is it going to be loving to men? And, you know, we could talk about loving to women as well in terms of comparisons and all these sorts of stuff. But that's the question I'll be asking. Is what I'm wearing as I leave the door, is what I'm wearing loving to others? Yeah. Ella, you're a woman. You got thoughts on this? You keen to hear them?
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic to talk about. I feel like we don't maybe talk about it enough, both men and women. I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and so I think wearing revealing clothing wasn't even something I thought twice about. It was just something everyone did. It is normalized in our world today. And so I think, there could be women watching who just haven't thought much about it. I would encourage you to think about it. But I think I felt reading passages like this felt really challenged to start asking myself more questions, digging a bit deeper into where is my heart in why I'm choosing to wear something revealing. Am I wanting other people, I guess, to be sexually attracted to me? Why am I wanting that? Why am I wanting, I guess, even my value and my worth to come from how I look, and my body, and from other people's thoughts about me, that kind of thing. And so I feel like modesty is a deeper heart issue. It feels really important to ask ourselves those questions behind why we wear what we wear. Same with everything that we do, really. What else was I going to say? I think as well, I would go so far as to say, ask those questions while you're shopping before it even gets into your wardrobe, so you don't have to make those daily decisions of like, is this modest enough? Is this too revealing? When you're deciding what you wear for the day.
Great one.
Before you even buy the thing, ask those questions at the shops. I think that just helps to not maybe even feel so overwhelmed by it, because it can feel overwhelming. I think I even overthink modesty now, and I'm definitely not perfect at it. Just to be asking those heart questions.
Yeah, really important. Yeah, what's the deeper motivation? And, you know, men, we can continue to wrestle with this as well. I think for us there is a little bit more physiologically impulse going on that we need to deal with as well. But there is also heart motivations. We need to keep fighting that our cultural message that pleasure is found in sexual fulfillment, in the pleasures of the eyes and so on. We need to fight that. That sort of pleasure is almost always at the cost of someone else, and porn is the ultimate expression of that someone is degrading themselves, hurting themselves, harming themselves for the sake of your entertainment. And that's true on kind of, that's true of these bikinis down the beach, to be honest. It's really saddening, I think, that someone would feel that, I don't know, that wearing some of these clothes is necessary for people to accept or love me or do that. I mean, that's really awful. And I want to do my part in not buying into that, for the sake of loving others as well. So let's be wise to these things. Let's not just be thinking about us, ourselves, how these things affect us, but let's think bigger than that as well.
I wanted to quickly say too, I think like women struggle with lust a lot more than we think they do, and I've seen so many men just be careless in, I think, more out of ignorance in what they wear at times.
Right. Yeah.
And it should be something they're thinking about as well.
No, it's certainly something I am now becoming much more mindful of. Like, should men wear a shirt when they go down the beach? Before, that's not something I ever really thought of. Just again go with the cultural thing. But for the sake culturally, less about my body per se, but for the sake of helpfulness culturally, would that be a good thing that Christian men started to do, to just go, nah, regardless of how comfortable I am in my own body, this is for the sake of, I think these are questions that we should wrestle with, are good questions. That's really helpful. Good one.
Well, thanks for listening. I hope you guys found that helpful. Is there anything coming up this week?
No, just worth mentioning. If you think we've missed stuff, or if you would like follow-up questions, please send them through on Living Grounded on the website or on myvillagechurch.net, or you can text them in. There's a slide at the end that has the info. But this Sunday, we'll look at John the Baptist. We'll look at again, what does it look like to repent? What does it mean to truly repent? Why should we? And so there's big questions. And other than that,
great. Well, we'll see you Sunday.
Ciao.